Hi everyone, I am Marcia Civic and this is Be Provided Conservation Radio. Today's show is about the war on wolves. The war on wolves is not a new concept, and I wanted to play this following news clip. It's from Representative Deborah Dingell of the state of Michigan as she stood in opposition of H.R. 6784, which was to delist the gray wolves from the Endangered Species Act. And this was in 2018. And she makes a good point about the science that is pertinent to today's show and was a focus of our last show with Adrienne Trevis of the Carnivore Coexistence Lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So listen in.
The bill before us would remove all protections for gray wolves under the Endangered Species Act. It would remove it all, including reissuing a 2011 rule by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that delisted the gray wolf in the Western Great Lakes. H.R. 6784 also seriously undermines the scientific integrity, which is one of the foundations of the Endangered Species Act. It would remove scientists from the decision-making process to delist gray wolves. Scientists, not Congress, should be making listing or delisting decisions.
So unfortunately, the wolves were taken off the endangered species list. It was one of the last things the Trump administration did before leaving office. And so now there has been a war being waged on our gray wolf populations. So there are conservative lawmakers in Idaho, Montana, Wisconsin, and other states that are proposing hunts to kill large populations of the gray wolf. Nearly 20% of the wolf population in Wisconsin was wiped out in just a few days after an unprecedented hunt in February, which was actually breeding season, no less. Idaho and Montana lawmakers are pushing to wipe out 90% of their wolf population, and they go against the advice of scientists and conservationists. So if these hunts go through, the animals will be killed by a variety of methods, such as aerial gunning, running down with motorized vehicles, shooting animals in their dens, poison, and other methods that seem illegal and cruel. So to talk about this heavy topic today, I have asked Michelle Lute, the Carnivore Conservation Manager with Project Coyote, to be on our show. And I really respect Michelle and the work she is doing. It is a challenging job to face all these terrible actions people are taking with our wild neighbors, but she is working hard to educate people and make changes. So welcome to the show today.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Well, it's good to see you again today, Michelle. And it is Endangered Species Day, which is really fitting for our topic today of gray wolves. I'm not sure if it's fitting to say Happy Endangered Species Day. I guess it'd be better if there wasn't such a need for such a day, but anyways, before we get into the nitty-gritty about the war on wolves, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more on how you became involved with carnivore conservation.
Sure. That's a long story.
Is it?
Probably go really far back. When I could first hold a pencil, I was drawing wolves and other animals. So I was always interested in wildlife. And so that was I guess I was born with that interest, and it never left me. So I was an environmental science major, really interested in ecology, studied animal behavior and ecology through my master's work, chased monkeys around Southeast Asia, and really liked studying social species. And that brought me back to wolves, basically, where I did a PhD in Michigan, your home state, understanding how to move from conflict to coexistence with wolves in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So after that, I was hooked, and I've built a career around trying to understand coexistence, just because I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face in conservation. I mean, obviously there's the climate change crisis, there's a biodiversity crisis, but large carnivores are really important contributors to biodiversity and healthy ecosystems. And they're one of the hardest animals for some groups of humans to get along with. So I found that one of the biggest challenges that needed lots of work and lots of people thinking about creative ways to coexist in the Anthropocene, which is, the human dominated era where, there's no such thing as a pristine ecosystem anymore. There's no such thing as a system that's untouched by humans. So to find ways to share space with these large critters with big teeth is, I think, really important and really challenging. And I was up for the challenge, and that's kind of my circuitous route and motivation for where I am today.
Well, thank you for your dedication and the work that you do with this. And as you mentioned, wolves have not always been seen in the brightest light. But there was a day where they were seen as kind of spiritual beings and creative beings and not thought of as terrible or vermin. Thoughts have definitely changed. There's definitely a lot more fear of these animals and hatred. And when did things change?
Right. Yeah. And it's such an interesting suite of different perceptions and cultures and how they interact with carnivores like wolves. You mentioned Native Americans, and the Ojibwe in particular have a really important connection to wolves. They see wolves as a sort of spiritual brother. It's Anishinaabe and Maingan, and that's a really important part of their stories and narratives about who they are as a people. And when you look at history, you see that the vilification of wolves and the attempted extermination of Native Americans have gone hand in hand. So you can look at history and you can understand why they see camaraderie and brotherhood with wolves. And it's a sad tale, but there's hope and inspiration that we can coexist and they can both have thriving cultures again. But I think in terms of where did it go wrong for white colonists, they came with a certain mythology of the big bad wolf, and that developed around the advent of agriculture, most likely, where wolves, instead of being a fellow hunter in the woods, now became a competitor for domestic livestock that were really vulnerable. As Europeans were trying to settle down and become farmers and more agrarian, wolves were an inconvenience and a threat. And so that even though the threat from wolves is very low, especially in North America, people still have these perceptions and myths that the wolf is scary and out to get you. And, when you look at the numbers, it isn't borne out. I mean, the loss from wolves and other predators is less than 1% of livestock losses across the continent. It's, it's birthing complications, it's weather, it's even theft. I come from 3 generations of farmers in the Midwest, so I understand the hard life of making a living off the land in the ways that ranchers and farmers do in this country. But there needs to be new ways of thinking about how we interact with wild nature and how we protect our domestic animals.
Well, this brings me to the question about wildlife management. You can correct me if I'm wrong in saying this, that the USDA Wildlife Services, they seem to be stuck way back in the past, even centuries ago, with these lethal methods that they're using for lethal control of carnivores to support their beliefs. They're still using them even though there's really no gold standard of evidence or science to really show that these are effective methods. Am I correct in saying this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Their lethal arsenal is archaic and brutal and does no good. And it's a vicious cycle. We use the example of coyotes just because they're so adaptable. But Wildlife Services comes in with their helicopters and their, whole toolkit of basically a war chest. Honestly, it's we talk about war metaphors sometimes and whether or not we should be propagating them when we talk about wildlife services and other forms of so-called wildlife management, but really they are the tools of war. Wildlife services use M44 devices, which are called M44s because they were originally 44 caliber pistol cartridges, and they dispel a cyanide capsule in the mouth of an animal that then basically deprives all their cells of oxygen across their body, so they suffocate from the inside out. I mean, that's a tool of war. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. So, you know, words matter. I don't necessarily want to propagate these metaphors, but they're really not metaphors. Wildlife Services is waging a war, and now we're seeing states waging wars on wildlife, and particularly wolves. They use helicopters to mow animals down. Obviously guns, poisons, the whole arsenal, snares. I mean, this is yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no holds barred, and it's not reflective of our morals or ethics in this country, but they operate quietly, and most people don't know that it's happening, and they're using federal taxpayer dollars to do so. And it's once we start daylighting these activities and we tell people what's going on, people are appalled and they're motivated to speak up, that's the great thing. That's the inspiring thing about, we have to feel motivated when all these bad things are happening. And particularly with wolves, I guess we have to go to a bad, dark place to really lay bare what's happening with wolf hatred in places like Wisconsin or Idaho or Montana or Wyoming. Mm-hmm. We've got to daylight it. And I think most people are going to see that this has to stop. So that's the silver lining, is that the problem is made very obvious, and the solution is to take away these tools from state and federal agencies that are using them.
Yeah, before we get into some of the ways we can, get people more aware and active and take part in this, can we talk a little bit about what has brought on the recent war of the wolves, in Idaho, Montana, and Wisconsin?
Sure. So there's a long history of wolves coming on and off the endangered species list. Lots of attempts or lawsuits to stop those attempts. And the latest one was the Trump administration announced right before the election that they were going to delist wolves. And again, just like all other attempts to delist wolves from the Endangered Species Act, this was a political bargaining chip. We've seen this many times before, and this was Trump throwing a bone to particularly conservatives that he wanted to solidify his base for votes. So they announced that before the election, and it went into effect January 4th of this year. And since then, states, as they have done in the past, moved very quickly to hunt wolves by all means possible. So the first that we saw was Wisconsin. Another sordid tale of, the state wildlife agency there in Wisconsin saying they were going to wait. So they have this Act 169 that mandates wolves be hunted in the state, which is very problematic because there's nothing science-based about that. Hunting wolves is never science-based, but to mandate that a certain species is hunted is also very problematic, and is, lays bare how political this issue is, that it's not even biologists that are saying, oh, we're doing this under the guise of population management. It's not even that. That's bad, but it's not even that. So Act 169 in Wisconsin mandates a hunt, and Wisconsin managers were going to wait until the fall, but they got a lawsuit from an outside organization that's basically for a certain contingent of hunters that want to hunt wolves and probably hate wolves. Mm-hmm. So they brought a lawsuit, and the judge sided with them for some potentially questionable reasons. And they went ahead with a hunt in February during the wolves breeding season, which is just atrocious, unprecedented. And we still don't know all of the impacts. We do know that they exceeded their quotas in most of the hunting zones. So they divide the state into various zones. And they said, you can take 10 wolves here, you can take 30 wolves here. And they exceeded them across the board. Hunters are required, once they kill a wolf, to report it within 24 hours. We saw on social media hunters organizing and telling each other, wait until the last possible minute to report your wolf so that we can exceed and kill more wolves in all of these places. So,
oh my gosh,
it was awful. And, another part, this is, just the hatred for wolves is astronomical. And the process is undemocratic, the way this happened. And tribes are supposed to be consulted with these decisions. There are treaty rights that were violated. They were not consulted. And as I mentioned, the Ojibwe have an important spiritual relationship. So this wolf hunt, they decided a certain quota And some of those wolves were supposed to go to the tribes, and the tribes are not going to hunt wolves because of their relationship to wolves.
Mm-hmm.
And the exceeding of this quota also then violates, the treaty rights of Native American tribes in the Great Lakes. And so we're not just talking about an undemocratic process that killed wolves. We're talking about a violation and a further disenfranchisement of people who have been historically disenfranchised, and it's continuing to this day. And it's there's not words for how upsetting that is on so many levels. So that's Wisconsin. Sorry. I know I'm always like such a Debbie Downer at work.
No, I totally understand. This is why your job is so difficult, and I hope you do get some sleep at night. Yeah.
I do.
Okay,
I'm pretty
good.
tired by the time my head hits that pillow.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's Wisconsin. And then we see in the legislative session in Montana a number of bills being pushed by Republicans in that state, led by just a terrible governor, Gianforte, who's also known for, beating up reporters and just not a fun guy by any means. He was found probably illegally trapping and killing a wolf, but of course just got a slap on the hand. So Montana, no better. All this legislation allowing trappers, I think, to go on private land without permission to hunt wolves, just incentivizing the killing of wolves in so many ways, expanding trapping and snaring and all kinds of horrible things. And then now Idaho really seems to be taking the cake for the worst situation and passing legislation to kill 90% of the state's population of wolves by any means possible. Traps, snares, of course, shooting, running them down with snowmobiles and ATVs, and expanding the Idaho Wolf Control Board's funding to $300,000 from something, I think it's a little over 100,000 right now. So almost doubling their pot of money to hire contract killers to take out wolves. So wolves are not going to be a species in Idaho or Montana, probably. I mean, they're going to be wiped out of these areas if a lawsuit or something else doesn't stop what's happening. They're going to be a species relegated to Canada and Yellowstone National Park, which is a beautiful place, but the park is a proverbial zoo for not only wolves, but bison, all kinds of animals step outside the protective boundaries of the park and are killed right away. So that's why we have a billboard coming out in Cody, Wyoming, to draw attention to the attacks on wolves from this billboard will be targeted for tourists driving into the park. Obviously, wolves are a huge attraction, as they should be. They're a great boon to the economy there. But I don't think a lot of tourists realize what's happening to the wolves that they've traveled sometimes across the globe to see. So we're trying to, again, daylight the war on wolves, essentially, and show that it's lovely what's happening in Lamar Valley, and it's a great story of the return of wolves and trophic cascades and their impacts on their cascading impacts across the ecosystem, higher biodiversity, healthier rivers. All of that is awesome, and we want to celebrate that. But we also have to recognize that as soon as those wolves leave the park, they're in the gun scope, the sights of people who hate them.
Wow, I don't know, just the whole psyche of these people who just want to go out and kill another living being in that way. It's not like the hunter is challenged by the stalk of their prey, or they need the animal for food or clothing. They're just going out to kill. They're not even saving the bodies. They're not using their fur. It just seems like a waste of life.
Yeah. I mean, it's it violates all of the ethical principles of responsible hunters. And we almost need. I often call these people killers because I know people who hunt. They hunt to put food on the table. They hunt to be a part of nature, and they're taking an ungulate species, a prey species that they're going to eat, or birds, turkeys, that sort of thing.
Right.
That's a totally different activity. That's a totally different mindset. That's a totally different perspective on the world and how to be in wild nature. And I absolutely respect that. I have a lot of friends. I have family who hunt in those ways. and they consider themselves hunters. What we're talking about with people who kill wolves out of hatred, or the participants of wildlife killing contests, this is another thing we can talk about.
Yeah.
Those people are not hunters, they're killers. And I won't denigrate my friends and family who are ethical hunters by using the name hunters for the people who engage in these other sorts of really egregious, barbaric activities.
Yeah, killers. It's hard to imagine these people loving anything if they can go out and just kill something so thoughtlessly, so barbarically. But I guess we could leave that for another show for psychologists. But anyways, you mentioned lawsuits, and are there currently lawsuits against these proposed hunts coming up?
Yes, so there are, I believe it's 3 parallel lawsuits that are all kind of working together to hopefully relist wolves back onto the Endangered Species Act protections. Unfortunately, that will not apply to wolves in the Northern Rockies. So wolves in the states of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and then the eastern portions of Washington and Oregon are excluded from the rest of the country because they were delisted through a rider in a federal budget bill. Again, another political bargaining chip from a senator who's Democratic and usually pretty good. Senator Tester threw a bone to wolf haters in Montana to solidify his votes because he had a contentious re-election happening. I think this was 2011. So rider in a federal budget bill delisting wolves in the Northern Rockies and preventing any sort of lawsuit from reversing that decision. So the current lawsuits will be a stopgap and potentially save Wisconsin's wolves and wolves outside of the Northern Rockies, essentially. But we have to go through a whole different petition and listing process for wolves in the Northern Rockies.
Yeah.
So it's a complicated political landscape to try and save Northern Rockies wolves, but we've got to try everything that we can do, and that's why today, Endangered Species Day, we've just launched a new petition addressed to the Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, and the Deputy Director, the Acting Director for now, Martha Williams, asking them to please pay attention to the outcry that is happening where people are calling on the relisting of wolves, including a letter that I signed that colleagues drafted. It's now been signed by 115 premier carnivore scientists asking Secretary Haaland and Deputy Director Williams to please relist wolves. There's a number of different avenues by which that could happen, but this letter outlines why they are not recovered yet. And one of the main points there is that 15% of wolves' historic range is currently occupied by wolves. The Endangered Species Act mandates that wolves are recovered in a significant portion of their historic range, and so it's problematic in how vague it is, and it's written to be vague, to be flexible, because it might depend on the species. A species that's mostly had habitat wiped out might not ever be able to recover 50, 60, 70% of its historic range if it's just already obliterated. So there's a reason for that flexibility, but it's problematic in how vague it is. Anyways, I think it's safe to say that 15% of wolves' historic range is not a significant portion at this point because a lot of habitat exists. Wolves were across North America. They are habitat generalists. They're thought of being a symbol and associated with wilderness. And that's mostly because they're safe from humans, typically in wilderness. They're safe from guns and cars that kill wolves. But really, they can exist in all kinds of habitats across the country. So they've still got a lot of great habitat that they could be in if we were willing to share. So 15% is not an adequate number, and thus wolves are not nearly recovered in their historic range, and that's why they need to be on the Federal Endangered Species Act for that reason. And then also because state wildlife management it's a failed state, essentially. Again, that's not even really metaphor. A failed state is a political body that's disintegrated to the point where governments are not meeting their responsibilities to function properly. And that's what we see with state wildlife management. They have public trust responsibilities to conserve wildlife, and they are not doing so. They are killing our wildlife, and we just can't trust states to protect wolves. So they have to be on they have to have federal protections.
Agreed. I guess I'm still flabbergasted at the thought of agencies that we are supposed to trust and do the right thing by us and wildlife seem to listen to politics and money and not the science. And I know a lot of your work, for your PhD and current work, and many conservationists, I speak with, you try to follow or implement a certain standard or, something like the gold standard for, evidence-based research. Yet some agencies do not follow the science, when that's what should be driving this. And can you explain why it's so important to conduct research following a gold or silver standard in conservation and how it can make a difference?
That's a great question. Can we get people to listen to the science? Scientific authority and trust in science is eroding, particularly in our country. We see it in all kinds of ways. Climate change denial, anti-vaccination movements that are not rooted in evidence, essentially, but are rooted in perceptions. And humans are understandably not good at assessing risk. I always use the example of flying versus driving. Driving is actually really much more dangerous for us than flying, but we're scared of flying because we don't have control of the situation because of all these other elements. So some of my research looks at risk perceptions and understands how that gets in the way of wildlife conservation. But I don't want to digress down that too much. We can talk about that more in a minute, perhaps. But so science matters, particularly in wildlife management. But science only answers the questions that we ask. And for a long time, we weren't asking about whether or not non-lethal methods worked. Mm-hmm. And now we are, because our morals and ethics are shifting, and we're broadening our perspectives, and we're asking those questions, and we're seeing that they do work, and they're more cost effective in the long run. And we're seeing all the reasons why lethal tools do not work to protect livestock, to conserve wildlife, to help people and wildlife coexist. They just don't work, but they're what we're used to doing, we, the collective we. So it's a matter of moving towards the best available modern science and getting that, getting eyes on those papers and getting that read. And people are just reluctant to think about, these new tools. It's just like any sort of behavior change. It's really difficult. So I think there are state agencies that do care about the science, and they think the science is going to make the decisions for them. And they need to be looking at the updated new science to understand really what is going to be best for human wildlife coexistence. So there's a barrier there, but there's some progress being made because we do now have work from Adrian Trevis and his colleagues establishing the gold standard and silver standard and saying, if we're going to say a method works, we have to have controls. We have to, really compare this in a scientifically rigorous way. And there's very few studies that are actually doing that. The ones that do show that non-lethal methods really do work. So we've got to just, get that word out there and share that science, and then hold people accountable to listening to the best available science. But I think it's also important to note that science is not prescriptive. It doesn't tell us what we ought to do. So the science is going to tell us what works and what doesn't, and what level of mortality a certain species or population can handle. But the question and the conflict is really about the intrinsic value of animals and when that value is trumped. So what I mean by intrinsic value is the value of an animal or any sort of living entity to exist beyond its use to anybody else. So if we say wolves have intrinsic value, we say they get to exist whether or not we get to see them or hear them or hunt them. They just get to exist. It doesn't matter if we're benefiting from their existence at all. And we do in many ways. But intrinsic value is that inherent core value of life that, again, another area of my research, I ask lots of different people, scientists, lay audiences, general publics, do you attribute intrinsic value to wolves? By and large, almost everybody says yes. Do you attribute intrinsic value to all life, to even whole functioning ecosystems? People say yes. So we're in agreement about that. The crux is, when is it right to take another life? For food is often agreed upon, that's still an appropriate reason to take a life. For immediate danger. So most people are not saying a rancher shouldn't be able to protect his livestock in an immediate situation of attack from a predator. And we have tools to prevent those in the first place, but if it does come down to that, most policies are not arguing against that. So when we can talk about the specific scenarios in which intrinsic value is trumped, then we can find common ground and we can make decisions that really do promote coexistence. But right now we're still dealing with people who don't want to give any justification for taking a life, and they just want to do it out of hatred. So that's an entrenched value-based conflict that we as a society have to say, this is not in line with our broader values. So we have to make policies that don't allow for people to do that. And so I've totally digressed. I think there was another part of your question. There was the first part, I think, that I'm forgetting, and there was the second part about listening to science. Do you remember?
Good question. Yeah, I got wrapped up into the research question. I kind of forgot what my second thought was. I think I was getting into the thought that we, on one hand, we have agencies that we trust, listening to the minority of people who are promoting such killings and hunts. And it just seems strange to me. And, I think the more that I talk to people about this, and, I feel that people are really outraged when they hear how our wildlife is being treated by this minority. And, many people get outraged when I describe what a killing contest is, and, and how these people are using barbaric methods to just get a few $1,000s or a gift certificate by wiping out a huge number of bobcats, wolves, and coyotes, and without any regard to their lives. So anyways, I was just hoping that you could talk about, the killing contests going on as well, and what Project Coyote is doing to stop these heinous acts.
Right. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
So yeah, you kind of touched on what killing contests are. So they're competitive killing events where people compete for cash prizes like guns. Sometimes children are involved. We see pictures of children holding AK-15s or AR-15s. I don't know my guns very well, clearly.
Better than I do, yeah.
Automatic crazy weapons, basically, standing on a pile of dead coyotes. I mean, this is what we're teaching our youth in these contests that happen under the guise of some sort of management that they're helping ranchers. But as we've already noted, the science shows that just obliterating a whole population of animals in a local area does nothing to protect livestock. In fact, it probably increases conflict in lots of situations and creates chaos across the landscape, and is also really dangerous to people with the methods that they use. So they're going out at night, they're using scopes and night vision and all these high-tech equipment, equipment that was developed in war scenarios that are now being used to wipe out animals and giving hunters or killers really total unfair advantage. They're violating all kinds of fair chase principles. This is not the kind of hunting tradition that we want to continue, or has ever really been a valued tradition in America. They're using all of these tools to wipe out animals, to go to a spaghetti dinner and raffle off prizes and win cash and guns. And really there's no management benefits whatsoever, although they will claim that. The justifications are so illogical, I don't know if we even want to get into it. But I mean, there's so many things that are just convoluted about how these people try and defend why they should be able to do this. But they're functioning outside of the agencies, so they're targeting animals that typically don't have bag limits or any sort of restrictions on method and manner of take. So they're looking at wiping out as many coyotes as they can, bobcats, foxes, squirrels, rabbits, but they can also include now wolves that they're delisted, and sometimes they include bears and mountain lions in this. And it's astronomically egregious, terrible, all of the hyperbolic words that you can think of to describe how horrible this is, they all apply. So Project Coyote is working nationally with a coalition of over 50 other organizations to stop these events federally and state by state. So we've got 7 states that have banned killing contests in various degrees, or enacted some kind of prohibition. The first being California back in 2014. And we're about to get the the 8th state, Maryland. The governor is either going to sign the bill or let it pass without his signing, but it looks like that's going to happen. By the time folks are listening to this, it actually might have become official law in Maryland. So we're really close, basically, to 8 states that have banned killing contests. We've recently partnered with National Geographic filmmakers to make the short film, the documentary Wildlife Killing Contests. Filmmakers and producers embedded in the Texas Big Bobcat Contest, which is one of the biggest and maybe the biggest contest in Texas. So they embedded in this contest and have some really firsthand footage that's really difficult to watch, but shows what the reality of the situation is on the ground, shows piles of dead animals that are, just wasted because people use these high-powered rifles that rip the animal apart, and so it renders even the pelt useless. So these animals are just wasted. They're often dumped out of sight. Again, that's another violation. This wanton waste is again a violation of typical hunter ethics. So this film shows the brutal reality of these contests, but it juxtaposes those images with the beautiful, inspiring images of these animals, coyotes raising their pups, and shows, the vision that we want to move towards by banning these contests. So we've released that film this year. And at the same time, there's a petition on our website, projectcoyote.org, asking for a federal ban on contests across the country on federal public lands. So we're aiming to get legislation to ban across federal lands, but we're also still working state by state, because on private lands and other places in the state in various states are still vulnerable to these contests that aren't on federal public lands. So we still got to work state by state. We're working in Virginia, we're working in Nevada, we're working in New York. There's legislation. So lots of opportunity for your readers to get engaged where they're at. If they're not in one of the 8 states that have already banned, they can get engaged in their state and pass resolutions at the city or county level to call for a ban in their state. And everybody can sign the petition, and please do so at projectcoyote.org to sign the petition, both for the wolf relisting and for wildlife killing contests. So check that out, please.
Yes, people, please check out projectcoyote.org, and I will post these links also in the show notes to the website, so you can get to the petition and to the film. Sorry, I'm going to jump back to the war on wolves a little bit. I just thought of a question. I thought if we can get enough signatures to show that the public is against these hunts, do you know how long it will take for it to go into effect? Because, fall's coming up fast, and I know Wisconsin is planning another wolf hunt that may likely wipe out the wolves in that area, especially after what happened in the February 2021 hunt.
Right. So the lawsuits, the timeline is such that it would be really tight potential that if the lawsuits are decided on in time, it could block a fall hunt in Wisconsin. As far as I've heard, Minnesota and Michigan do not have hunts planned yet for this year. So really focusing on blocking that in Wisconsin, asking for a quota of 0 if we're not going to have lawsuits save the day there in that case. But in terms of relisting, there's a couple of different options. There's an emergency relisting rule that could go into effect pretty quickly. And then they have something like, I want to say 240 days. I could be wrong, but it might be 240 days to come up with a new plan. So this is kind of a stopgap emergency relisting rule, but then they have to come up with a full decision and plan within something like less than a year. So that would be another potential option that could move pretty quickly. But a lot of these decisions go really slow because they have to, do the formal federal decision-making processes. They've got to have public comment periods open for a certain amount of time. And all of that is great and really important. And we're so confident that we'll keep getting people to comment on these decisions. One of the last times they were open to public comment for relisting, I think there was 1.8 million people who were for wolves relisting that sent comments in. So the public support is there. It's very clear. So we've got that on our side. So we just have to have responsible legislators that listen to their constituents.
Well, now I feel like I'm going to be the Debbie Downer because, there's a case, with the Tule elk at Point Reyes um, whether they should keep them in a certain area versus some dairy farms. But that's a whole other story. But anyways, the public comment there, 90% of the comments were for the elk, not the dairy farms, and yet it was still ruled or voted on that they would be against the elk. And it's really hard or maddening, when you get the public support, but these legislators, representatives aren't listening to their constituents.
And that's the other rub.
Yeah.
We organize on the grassroots level for a lot of this work. We can drive public comment, and it's, particular special interests, certain lobbyists that have the ear of legislators in places. And so that's another important thing. We've got to hold legislators accountable if they don't listen to their constituents. And that's Wisconsin legislators who could have intervened on the Wisconsin wolf issue. I mean, obviously they couldn't necessarily have undone the lawsuit, but if people are not, respecting democratic processes, they have to be outvoted and held accountable. So we've got to be paying attention to, our local legislators. So this is county commissions, this is your city council people, and not just on the federal level. So it's a lot to track, but it's really important. We've got to make sure that we've got people representing our interests and values.
Yes, definitely. So people don't give up hope, stay involved with what's going on with wildlife in your area, and become more informed. And again, projectcoyote.org has great resources that you can check out on their website, and keep talking to your state representatives and legislators and governors and anyone who will listen. But Michelle, besides voting and doing this, are there any other ways that people can help?
Yeah, I mean, building public awareness is one of the first key things, because a lot of people just don't even know this is happening. They're not aware that wolves were delisted. They're not aware of the hunts that are happening in certain states. So the first and foremost is get educated, read up yourself, and share those materials with your family and friends. Not just Project Coyote, but our other partners are all doing this work. So reshare their posts on social media, share it far and wide, and let people know what's going on. This is not the kind of news you want to see in your Facebook feed, but we can't turn away, because ultimately we're all responsible, and we're all responsible for giving our children and our next generation, a world that's worth inheriting. So we can't look away, and we've got to talk about this, even if it's not fun. But many hands make light work, and together I think we can really make sure that we have wolves again someday in North America, in the U.S.
Yeah. With what you're seeing, are you feeling some hope at all in any of this? Or do you feel hopeful?
I am.
Yeah.
I am, because we're seeing such amazing response. We send out action alerts asking people to get involved, and we had people calling Governor Little, asking them to veto the Idaho bill. Unfortunately, there was sort of it passed by such a majority that it was veto proof. So he really probably didn't want to use any political energy to veto a bill that probably still could have gone through. But we had such an amazing response for people calling the office, emailing him. We've had an amazing response in Wisconsin and everywhere we're working, and we're expecting that to continue. So that's the hope, that there's a lot of people who care about the wild world and protecting it. And if we just band together, I think we're going to win someday.
I hope so. Thank you, Michelle. And before I let you go, I just wanted to make sure we covered everything, and I wanted to ask you if there was anything else you wanted to discuss about getting the word out of Project Coyote and wolves and what's going on.
I feel like we've covered a lot of it. There's the wolf petition, there's a wildlife killing contest petition. There's so much that you can do in your state around wildlife killing contests. So not just raising awareness, but as I mentioned, the passing resolutions at your city or county level. If you're interested in doing that, please contact us. Go on our website. There's a ton of resources. We've got a toolkit that the Humane Society of the United States, and we have partnered, they're co-founders of our National Coalition to End Wildlife Killing Contests. They've got this great toolkit that we've got on our website that can tell you how to write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper to raise awareness if you've got a local contest happening or you just want it banned in your state. That's another great activity. Tons of different actions you can take, and please reach out to us. Again, you'll find all of our information on the website, but you can also email info@projectcoyote.org, and you're gonna, the email's gonna get forwarded to me basically, and we'll start talking about what we can do in your local area to stop wildlife killing contests, or to get a billboard up highlighting that wolves are valued in the state. We're seeing a lot of interest in billboards right now. We've seen a partner organization put Hunters for Wolves billboards up in Wisconsin, and that's getting huge response. So there's tons of support. Even people who didn't necessarily care that much about wolves are seeing how bad it is right now, and they want to get involved. So get involved, bug me, email me, and we'll work on something together, because there's lots of options. And yeah, the sky's the limit in terms of creative opportunities. And one particular thing across all of our, I'll stop right after this, but another really important thing is to collaborate with ethical hunters. They're a really important voice. Some of our legislators are going to listen to them in wildlife management more than they're going to listen to, the bunny hugging, tree hugging Michelle, who's, says she's got a PhD in wildlife management, but they don't care about the science. They want to hear from the hunter. Yeah. So we need ethical hunters to be brave, to speak out. We need responsible farmers and ranchers that are implementing non-lethal tools and willing to talk about how those tools work. We need those people showing up. We want to elevate those voices. They're really important. So if you know hunters, tell them about what's happening, put us in touch with them. We want to elevate their voices and partner on all of these issues, from wolves to coyotes and everything in between.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad you brought that up about ethical hunters. And so if there's any out there that would like to contact Michelle, please do. And thank you again for all you do, Michelle. And, I'm so inspired about you and the work that you're doing. And I know it's really hard sometimes, but like you said, we need to keep aware of what's going on and keep it real and realize that this is actually happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, everyone. This concludes today's show. I am Marcia Civic, and this is Be Provided Conservation Radio. Today's music is called Forget Me Not by Ravel, and I thought it fitting for our topic today. So our show notes with all the links discussed in the podcast can be found at www.beprovided.com, and please check out Project Coyote's website to sign the petitions, view the videos, and look at all their valuable resources that they have. And they are found at www.projectcoyote.org. Thank you for listening, everyone. Stay safe and stay healthy.